over them. So I'm going to get rid of this thing. Oops. Okay, it doesn't want me to do that for some reason. Okay. Okay. So one thing that I'm going to talk about sort of to begin with, which isn't necessarily related to Photoshop, but is important to basically everything we're going to do in this class, is just basic file management. Um, and so what I'm going to do is start on my desktop here, and we want to make sure that like we always know exactly where all our files are because we're going to be combining a lot of different files on the computer. And if you lose track of where the files are and you misplace them or they disappear for some reason, then it's going to break our project. So I really recommend doing, following along with these steps. It's going to make your life a lot easier in the long run. Um, you know, I've taught this class for a long time. I've seen people do lots of crazy stuff. I know that a lot of you guys are not going to follow the steps, and then I'm going to have to come back and say, well, that's why you should have followed the steps. So if you want to avoid me having to say that to you in the future, just go along with it. I like to keep things nice and organized. And so I'm going to always talk about where the files should go and how I know where they are and how they're going to go into the project and stuff like that. Um, so I'm going to go to my desktop and I'm going to create a new folder for this class. And I'm going to put all of my different projects in here. So I'm going to call this folder MMP 100 and I'm going to open this up. And I'm on a Windows today. I might be on a Mac sometimes. So I'll show different versions of this. But they're more or less the same thing. They just have different interfaces. Inside my MMP 100 folder, I'm just going to create a new folder here for this specific project. So I'm going to call this Photoshop Intro. And we're going to be doing a bunch of different projects. So having them in different folders is going to be helpful for organization. And so in here, I'm going to put an image. And I'm going to start with an image so I have something to work with in Photoshop. Photoshop is not really specifically designed for like creating new things. It's more designed for working with existing images and adding stuff to them. So what I'm going to do is go online and find an image to work with. There's a good website for finding images called Pexels. There's a bunch of other websites that I'll show in the future as well. But this is a free stock photo website. So you can see images that are created, excuse me, and licensed for people to use for, whatever they want. So I'm just going to look for a random image. I think I'll find an image of let's do a cat and find a cool cat image to use. And so here we see a bunch of different cat images. I'm going to choose one that I think will be fun to work with. Let's see. This one's kind of cool. So I'll click on this, and you can see there's a button that says free download. And then there's going to be some information about it. So right here it says Creative Commons. There's a name of this image. And if I click on more info, it's going to show me more details about this image. One thing I want to do is I don't want to forget where I found this image in case I need to get it later. So I might bookmark this or I might save it somewhere. Whatever you normally do is fine. I might just create like a little document and save the link somewhere. But you can see some details about the image. Um, these are the dimensions, so that's the width and height in pixels. This is a file size. 1.34 megabytes is pretty decent. This is the type of camera it was shot on and the focal length of that camera, the aperture, ISO. This is the date that it was taken, and this is the basic color palette. So there's a lot of useful information there. You can click there to download. And then it also, if you click on this drop down, it gives you some different options for sizes. So the original size is actually really, really big. I'm going to go with the large size. It's going to be a little bit smaller. It's going to have mostly the same amount of detail, and it's just going to be a little bit faster to use on my computer. So I'm going to click large and then click download selected size. Okay, so then I want to make sure to save this link so I can get this information later. So I'm going to minimize my browser and go back to my desktop. I still have my Photoshop intro folder over here. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to make a new text document just to take some notes. So I'll call this notes and open this up. And I'm just going to paste in this URL and just say cat image, just so I don't lose that in the future. And then I want to get that image in here. So I'm going to leave this window open and I'm going to right click on my file explorer and click on a new window. And I'm going to move this over and click on the downloads folder. I'm going to delete this stuff down here because I don't need that anymore. So here's my downloads folder. It's probably maybe not what your downloads folder looks like if you don't clean it out as often as I do, but it's nice to be able to find stuff more easily. Anyway, here's my cat image. I'm just going to drag it over here. And so now my downloads folder is nice and empty and my image is over in my folder. So I'll always be able to find it. I won't have to search through my downloads folder if I want to find it in the future. So now if I want to open this in Photoshop, there's a couple ways I can do it. I can right click on this, and if I click open, it's probably going to open in like a Windows program. But if I scroll down, there's an open with, and this is the same thing on Mac. If you right click on the file, it'll give you different options. And it doesn't even give me Photoshop here, so I'm going to choose another app and see if I can find Photoshop. There it is. And I'm going to click OK. And so that's going to open up my image in Photoshop. It looks like it's thinking. And there it is. Here's my image opened in Photoshop. And so I'm going to play around with a couple things with this image just to kind of get used to the Photoshop interface. It's probably the first time a lot of y'all have used Photoshop. So I'm just going to go over some of the basics and then we'll add to it as we go through the semester. So this is the default layout for Photoshop. You can see the image is in the middle. There's some menus over here on the right, and there's a big toolbar on the left, and then there's some properties up here at the top. Um, if you go to Window and go to Workspace, you can see that we're in the default Essentials workspace. And if I click Reset, it'll reset it to how it looks. So you can make modifications. I can like make certain windows bigger. I can make the toolbar bigger. Okay, maybe I can't. Um, I can move these windows around like that. So there's a lot of different stuff I can do. I can put this down here. The interface is very customizable. I can click on these different tabs and put them in different places. There's a lot of stuff that I can do, but if I go too far, I can always just go to Reset Essentials and it'll take me back here. One of the things I used to like to do is I usually like to put my layers in its own little area here because it's usually down here at the bottom and I like to be able to see all the layers. So I might do something like that. And if you have a specific layout that you like, you can also go to the workspace and you can save a workspace. So you can click new workspace and I can call this Owen's Cool Workspace. And now if I go back to Essentials, and go to reset. If I want to go back to that workspace I just created, I can just click on it and it'll make it for me. So the interface is highly customizable, which is really nice. You don't have to customize anything, but it makes it easier to put stuff where you want it. So I'm going to leave my layers over here. A couple other things. So this main area If I scroll on my mouse, I can kind of scroll up and down. And if I hold control on my keyboard, I can scroll left and right. I'm using the scroll bar for this. If you don't have like a mouse, um, I have a mouse like this with a scroll wheel in the middle. That makes it a lot easier to use programs like this. If you don't have one, you can get one for like 20 bucks, or you can come to school. We have them in the labs here. So I really recommend using a mouse with a scroll wheel because it makes your life a lot easier when it comes to this type of software. Um, Another thing that I can do, excuse me, um, if I want to zoom in and out with the scroll wheel, I can hold the Alt key on the keyboard. And so I'm holding the Alt key on the keyboard, and that lets me zoom in and out. So I can zoom in and then zoom way into. And so here we can see what we were looking at before, these kind of pixel grids. And then if I hold the space bar on the keyboard, it turns my mouse into a little hand. And then I can drag by clicking and moving the mouse, I can drag around the image. So I'm going to zoom out a little bit, and then I'm going to hold the hand. And now I can drag around the image. So I can move and look at very specific parts of the image. And then I can zoom out a little bit more and then hold spacebar and drag around again. So that's kind of the main way that I tend to look at the image to move around. There are also these scroll bars, so you can just click on the scroll bars and move them. There's also a zoom tool over here in the toolbar. So if you click on this zoom tool and just click, it'll zoom in. And if you hold Alt, it'll zoom out. So that's another way that you can move around. There's also, you can just click on the hand tool to select it. So you can just always have it. I usually use space to get it so I can keep a different tool, but those tools are available. You can also hold control and hit minus or plus to zoom in or out. And you can hit Control 0 to center the image, and you can hit Control 1 to show like the actual size of the image. So it zooms in a little bit. So the image doesn't quite fit inside of my window right now. So those are all just kind of like basics of how to manipulate the image that you're looking at on the screen in Photoshop. Um, so let's look at a few other things that we can do. So there's this toolbar lets me do a lot of different stuff. I'm going to go over some of the basics. One thing that I'm going to do first is you can see this layer here. The background layer is locked. It has a little lock here. This is kind of the default when I import an image. It's going to be locked in the background. If I want to unlock it, I just double click on it and it's going to turn it into a layer. So that way I can manipulate the layer. Before I do that, if I try to move it, this is the move tool. It won't let me do anything. So I can double click on this and convert it to a regular layer. And now I can move the image around. So I probably don't want to move this image around much because I don't have anything behind it. But what we'll start doing on Thursday is compositing two images together. So then it'll be useful to move things around. So I'm going to undo that. Another thing is if I move the image and then I hit Control Z, um, that does undo. So you've probably used Control Z in other programs before. If I move this a bunch of times, sorry about that. If I move this a bunch of different times, I can still hit Control Z a bunch of times and it'll go back to where it was. If I want to redo something, I can hit Control Shift Z and that'll redo the movement. So using Control Z and Control Shift Z is really useful. Uh, those uh, those actions are also under the Edit menu, so I can go to redo and undo in the Edit menu as well. But I tend to use the keyboard to do stuff like that. just to make things a little bit faster. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to look at here, this little dotted tool here is called the marquee tool. And in Photoshop, if you hover over, it'll show you how things work. So the marquee tool is used to make a selection. So you can select an area of an image and then you can do stuff with it. I can copy this. So I'm going to go to edit and I can copy and then paste. I can also hit Control C, Control V. And now I have this slice of the image that I copied out of here that I can. All right, sorry about that. So once I make a copy, I can move it around and do different stuff with it and manipulate it. So you also notice me turn off the visibility of the layers. So each layer has a little eyeball next to it. So if I want to turn the layer off, I can do that. I can also drag the layers around. So if I put these layers, if I put this layer below this one, we're not going to be able to see it because it'll be under the other layer. So if I want to see this layer, I need to move it up here and then I can move it around. So I'm going to undo that. Let's move this layer over here. You can also lock your layers. So if I want to prevent myself from moving this layer down here, I can put a lock on it. So now I can't move it by accident. So that's the selection tool. There's other types of selection tool, like I can use a circle selection. I can do uh, single row or column. Usually I'll use the rectangular one. There's also the lasso tool, which I can draw a selection. So if I wanted to just select like part of the cat, like I can just get the cat's eyes. I can use the lasso tool, so I can draw a circle here. And then if I draw again, it's going to get rid of that circle, but I can hold shift to add to it. So I can draw a circle around here and then hold shift and add here. And then I can cut maybe and paste. And now I have these eyes on another layer. So I can do something weird with that. Um, the There's also the magnetic lasso tool and polygon lasso tool. They kind of do the same thing, but they'll help you move around something. Uh, we also have the object selection tool. I'm going to go over this a lot more on Wednesday when we talk about compositing. So I'll skip it for now. I hear some noise. Oh, it looks like somebody um, is Big Boy Shuda trying to. Are you trying to say something? Because I'm hearing some noise. Okay. Um, okay. I'm just gonna finish this up, but then I don't think Big Boy Shuda that you've been here before, so I'm just gonna try to take your attendance when I'm wrapped up with this. Uh, okay, so we will go over the object selection tool more on Wednesday. The crop tool is to basically change the size of the image. So if I turn on the crop tool, if I want to make this less wide, I can do this and then hit enter. And I've cut the size of the image down. So that's how I can make the image smaller or add more space to it. I'm gonna sorry, skip this one for now. Excuse me. Okay, so I'm going to skip the rest of these tools for now. We're going to go over them later. Um, what I'm going to do now, excuse me, I'm going to show you guys. Okay. I'm going to show you guys one last thing, and then I'll stop and you guys can work on your own for a little bit. So if I want to add another image in here to play with, we added the first image by opening it directly in Photoshop. So let's say we wanted to add another image in here. I'm going to go back to my browser for a second. And let's say we want to add a friend for the cat to hang out with. I'm going to look up another animal. Maybe this time I'll look up a lizard. Hmm.
Mm.
Hmm. Hmm. Okay, so this looks like a good lizard to use. I'm going to add this to my notes real quick. And so now I have that URL saved. I'm going to download this image. So there's a similar size, so I'm going to go with that size, large. And I'm going to download that image. So now,
Lizard really scares me.
sorry, the lizard scares you?
I mean, I'm afraid of lizards.
Okay, sorry about that. I think I'm just going to go with it for now, but I'll try to avoid lizards in the future. Um, so I'm going to go to my downloads folder again, and I have this new lizard image. I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
drag this over here. And so now I need to add this new image into the Photoshop file that I already have. So there's a, excuse me, there's a couple ways to do this. I can drag it directly on. So I can open my Finder or my File Explorer on top of Photoshop and just drag it over like that. And when it shows up here, there's some transform tools. So I can, excuse me, move it around. And when I have it where I want it, I just hit enter. And now I have a new layer. Another way that I can do it is just go to File and go to Import, or no, no, that doesn't have an image. Let's try Open and go to Desktop and go to MMP 100, Photoshop Intro, and open up my lizard. Okay, I guess that doesn't add it in here. Um, Maybe there's a different import. Um, I thought this would be under import, but I don't see it there. So let's forget that for now. So we're just going to drag it over. So I'm going to drag this image over here and hit enter. And now I can move this around.
Wait, question. There's a way to import images without dragging and dropping.
There is, I forgot what it is apparently. I thought it was through import, but I don't see import here. But we can just Google it real quick.
Yeah, when I look at import, it says like variable data, video frames, notes, and support, something like that.
Yeah, it says that for me too. Um, okay, this says drag it.
But another question, like I don't know, like if this is like with like the latest versions of Adobe, But like when it comes to like PNGs, like when I drag them in, it usually has like the checkerboard. Is that like how it is now, or is it because I mean typically like me, I'll just copy and paste the image instead of like saving it. So I don't know if that's like the reason why like a PNG will come up like that.
You're talking about the background.
Yeah.
It just depends on the size. So PNG and JPEG, once you put it into Photoshop, it has the same type of data. It's just the pixel data. If you see that checkerboard, it just means it doesn't fill up the whole window. So you can
Okay.
use the crop tool to move it down if you want to.
Got you.
All right, sorry, I'm struggling through this coughing issue, but I'm just gonna try to wrap this up. So the other way it says place an embedded. Okay, so this is they changed the location of this. So file, place embedded. So that's how you add the image through the interface. So that's the same thing as drag and drop, but it's through file, place embedded. Okay. So I want to go over two more things real quick, and then I'm going to end. So the first thing I want to go over is how do we actually change the size of these things? That's under Edit and then Transform. So if you go to Edit and then Transform, you can do Free Transform, which lets you size and rotate and do different things, or you can go specifically to Transform and do Scale, Rotate, or all these other things. So I'm going to use free transform. That brings back these little thingies, these squares. So if I go like this, it scales this image up and down. If I hover a little bit outside, I can rotate the image around like that. And then when I scale it, you can see it maintains its dimensions, like the width and the height stay relatively the same. But if I hold shift, then I can squash it in different ways. So that's how I can change the size of an image. So if I want to make my lizard smaller, I can drag it down like that and then move it over here. And when I'm done with a transform, I just hit enter. Did somebody have a question?
So
Um,
I forgot. So how do we make a
sorry, can you say that again? It was kind of quiet.
I forgot. So like how do we make a folder?
A folder?
Yeah, like a file on your window.
Oh, let me go over that again. Uh,
Like,
so to make a folder, if you're on Windows, you just right click and go to New and then go to Folder. And then when you open it, you can name the folder. I already have the MMP 100, but that's how you can make it. If you're inside of the File Explorer, like over here, you can do the same thing. Just right click, go to New, and go to Folder. Excuse me.
thank you.
Yep. Okay, last Photoshop thing, and then I'm done. So notice this layer has this little tiny icon next to it. What that means is that it's a smart object. Um, sorry, I'm getting a lot of noise. Lolita, I think there's some noise coming from your channel. Do you mind muting?
Oh, sorry.
Okay, so this little thing means it's a smart object, which basically means that Photoshop remembers the pixels in this image. So for example, if I do a transform and make it really, really small and hit enter, it looks like it has less information. But when I transform it back, it still has a lot of information. That's because it's a smart object. It's not changing the actual pixel data. It's just changing how it shows up on the screen. So if I change this to a regular image, then it's going to change that quality. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to right click on the layer and duplicate it so I don't lose the original data. And I'm going to hide that layer. So then with this lizard image, I'm going to right click and I'm going to go down here, or no, it's right here, to rasterize layer. remember we talked about raster earlier means pixels basically. So when I click rasterize, now this is not a smart object anymore. If I transform this object, I'm actually transforming the data inside of it. So if I make it really small and then make it bigger again, see what happens is it gets pixelated. So when I made it small, I squished all those pixels down. And because it's a raster, it doesn't save the image the way the smart object does. So when I blow it back up, I lose all of that information. So this is called destructive versus non-destructive editing. When I edit something in a way that loses information, that's called destructive editing. There's no way to get that information back. Obviously in Photoshop, I can hit undo a couple times and it'll go back, although it's not going. I guess I went too far. Oh, there we go. But if I leave this program and come back, I won't be able to undo anymore. So I've lost that data. So that's an important thing to know is when you do destructive editing, you're not going to be able to get that data back. So I'm going to redo all that stuff and get back to my pixelated lizard. So that might be kind of cool, but if you ever want to go back to the way it was, you need to make sure to save this original image. Okay, one last thing before we go. Sorry, I lied. Once you've done all this editing, what you've created is a little bit more complicated than just a regular image. A regular image is just the pixel data. What we've created is this composition that has a bunch of layers. And if we want to save that so we can edit it later, we can't just save it as a regular image. We'll talk about how to do that later, how to export new images. But for now, we just want to save a Photoshop file so we can continue editing later. So we actually need to save a new file. I'm going to go to File, Save, and it's going to ask me what I want to call it. And notice the save as type is Photoshop. So this is a Photoshop type file. I'm already in the right folder, but just in case, I want to make sure to put this in the right folder. So if I was on my desktop, I would go to MMP 100, go into Photoshop Intro, and then I'm going to save this as intro .psd. So a .psd file is a type of file that I can open in Photoshop. So I'm going to click Save, click OK. And so if I leave Photoshop, I'm going to exit Photoshop for a second. See, I have this intro.psd. If I open this up, we're going to see that all those layers are still preserved. Oh, it's set to default to a different image editing program. The GIMP image editor is sort of like a free open source version of Photoshop. So you can use that if you want to, but that's not what I want to use. I want to go back to Photoshop. Okay, so let's open it in Photoshop. Okay, so once it's open, you're going to see all of those layers are still there. So I can continue editing and all that information is still available. Once we learn how to export files to JPEGs or PNGs, when you export an image, it flattens everything out. And so you can't go back and edit it. So that's something that we need to remember is that our PSD files are like our edit files. We're not going to like send those to people or post them online. We're going to keep those for ourselves so that we can edit the image later. But when we want to share something, we're going to want to make a smaller version of the file that doesn't have all the layers and information. The Photoshop file itself is going to be pretty large. You can see it's 16 megabytes, which is way bigger than what you would want to post on Instagram or Twitter or anything like that. Whereas a regular image file is a lot smaller. This one is 150 kilobytes. This one's 300 kilobytes. So it's much smaller in file size than the Photoshop file. Okay, I think that's everything I want to cover. Sorry, that took a little bit longer because I'm having this bad cough. But we do still have a few minutes. We have like 13 minutes left in class. Let me stop recording.